About a week ago, I was lucky enough to receive a coverage key to DOOMBLADE, a recently released Metroidvania-inspired indie title. Despite having never heard of it before booting it up, I can confidently say this game totally kicks ass, and I strongly recommend you guys give it a shot. I'm being completely genuine here, by the way. I'm not selling my integrity for $15. I would absolutely put it up there with Hollow Knight and Guacamelee as one of my favorite indie Metroidvanias, and I'm genuinely puzzled by the lack of fanfare I've seen surrounding its release. The basic premise is that your people, the Gloomlings, were genocided by these three dudes called the Dreadlords, who all live in a giant evil sky fortress hovering above you. You get this crazy strong sword and set out to kill them. The movement is some of the smoothest out there, the soundtrack is insane, and it's all around just a super fun game. The neat thing about covering indie games is that there's always a chance the developers are going to actually see the video, so it's kind of like having a direct line to the Oval Office, so to speak. But yeah, let the record show that I was an early adopter and champion of the game. It's the real deal. You heard it here first, folks. As for the rules of the ranking, I'm not counting the horde fights as bosses, although they were all really fun combat puzzles, which I think is kind of a different thing. The lone semi-exception is the final Fanatic Gauntlet, since the trophy pop-up says it's defeating the Void Child, who I guess is a boss in a sort of roundabout way. Lastly, before we delve into the video, I'd like to thank our patrons for their support of the channel. 'Tis always appreciated, and it goes a long ways. With that prelude accounted for, let's get into the ranking. There really are no bad bosses in this game, although this is definitely the least interesting of the lot. DOOMBLADE is at its best when the music is blaring, you're flying around like a living pinball, and chaos just generally dominates the screen. This spontaneous forest ambush lacks all of these things, and is rather repetitive once you figure out how they work. Essentially, you're dodging a handful of ninja stars until they decide to group rush you, which is when you jump in and click on them as much as possible before they poof back into hiding. Other than seemingly getting faster as their health depletes, which honestly might have just been my nerves talking, the routine begins to grow a tad dull as it nears its end. Even after beating the game, I actually have no idea who the hell these guys are, since they don't resemble any of the main species or seem to be working for the Dreadlords either. My best guess is a pack of anorexic but agile new Wilderwood locals, but your guess is as good as mine. Before you kill the ruined golem, basically everyone there fucking hates you, so it would add up. It really is strange how often the final boss of a game ends up on the lower end of the list for me. I feel a little bad dunking on these guys since the build up to the fight is so good, but I just can't ignore the fact that it's ever so slightly frustrating in a handful of ways. When you first get there, you're absolutely raring to go, especially after seeing your buddy the locksmith get brutalized not more than an hour ago. When the fight actually kicks off though, it's just a waiting game where you spam click spawning in skulls until a shield barrier around the Dreadmaster deactivates. After you do this enough times, the Butcher shows up, and from here you'll probably piece together the structure of the fight and see where things are going. First off, I have mixed feelings about fighting all three lords at once. I could see it being really cool if each got their own boss fight at a varying point in the game, but that would require them not hiding in their fortress the whole time, which would drastically change their role in the universe. As they are, they exist as this distant but imposing force, thought to be practically invincible by everyone including themselves. If you were able to kill one after maybe 90 minutes of gameplay, it would make them feel a lot less dangerous, since you'd know without a shadow of doubt that they were vulnerable to you, and the other ones would probably panic and lose their confidence air if they knew. So from a story and atmosphere perspective, it makes sense. But gameplay wise, it limits the moveset of each lord to one repetitive action, which makes them dull to fight in isolation and irritating in a group. By the time all three are on the scene and attacking at once, the only word I could really use to describe it is clusterfuck. Chaos is all well and good, but the pittance of items becomes a nuisance when the master's exploding head starts skull-fucking you for 3 chunks worth of health, and being pinballed between their shields is practically a death sentence if you make that one mistake. I assume it was an intended part of the challenge that you have to account for the little elevation boost you get when you attack the skulls, but the amount of times it forced me into the master's shield is just beyond recollection. Also, I don't know what the hell you're supposed to do for that one move where they summon a collective red orb and send it towards you. I've seen one guy take care of it by wicked winding up through the first bar and then targeting the other side's Dreadlord and canceling that attack animation after passing the middle laser and closing with a doom drop, but that just didn't work for me. I don't know if that was an unintentional exploit they patched in the map marker update or what, but I had to find super awkward ways around this attack, like using a deep spawn in midair to cleave through it that just didn't feel smooth or intentional either. Lastly, I feel like some of the animations are weirdly subpar, like the Dread Butcher's lunging animation. It looks like he's a piece of paper being slid around South Park style, or like a PNG dragged around by a mouse. In a game with otherwise fairly smooth animations, it struck me as odd. It's worth mentioning there are pluses though, like the awesome music and the cool detail of the Apostle using the machine you can find elsewhere in their base, where the DOOMBLADE reveals its weakness to Thundermancy as a reward for your curiosity. It really isn't a bad fight per se, and I can see it being more fun if I understood aspects of it better, but there are just too many individual issues for me to in good faith claim to have enjoyed it more more than any other boss save for the Assassin Squad. That final shot of their heads impaled on a fucking pike next to your throne is badass as hell though, I dig it. There are apparently a bunch of endings, including one where evil mushrooms kill everyone, although I sadly don't know the specifics because I didn't figure out where all the spore planting locations were before beating the game. Another time, perhaps. The Hive is more of a sequence than a boss, but I count it because it's intense as hell. The first couple rooms are easy since they're just showing you the ropes, like how to clear the path forward and deal with different varieties of bug that emerge from said hive. That final room though is a fucking madhouse. I can't imagine a single Dark Sprout surviving a full field trip through this gauntlet from hell. It's ballistic. You have suicide bombing fireflies coming at you from every possible angle at every second, crowding you in a swarm while dickhead shielded moths do their best to deflect you into their comrades. I would absolutely call this the hardest boss in the game. I died so many times it was sort of pathetic. On that note, thank God they didn't rip off Dark Souls and do that thing everybody's doing now where you have to collect your money again when you die. I'm exhausted of that mechanic and I'm sick of everyone doing it ad nauseum. The first time I died in this game and saw I kept my money, I felt like jumping out of my chair and doing a little jig. I did a huge jig, however, when I finally exterminated this wretched cavern full of pests and vermin. I was really pissed off in the moment, but it's one of those things where when it's all said and done, you're more satisfied than anything else, thankfully. The Fanatics are the most annoying enemies in the game, hands down. Those bouncy shields are nothing short of infuriating. So why is this fight not closer to the bottom? Because you get to firing squad an entire horde of them with a cannon. It's a good thing the Void Child isn't too particular about besting his goons in a fair fight to earn his respect, although I never figured out how to collect Gloom Souls, so the specifics of that part of the story are an enigma to me still. Not much behind my reasoning here, I just like watching these fucking hoodlums get blasted open in droves. This is a surprisingly engaging showdown considering it's against two conjoined green squares. Something about cutting through their thin little thread is very pleasing to me, partly I'm sure thanks to successfully lining up a cutting angle that works. This gauntlet as a whole was easier for me since I got the Grublin lungs thanks to a thoughtful suicide bomber, but the boss capping it off made sure that I had to put in some degree of elbow grease to make it out alive, which was nice. I'm not sure what the story behind this thing is, but given how polluted Paradise Wells is, I assume it's congealed polluted air or something. Somebody should really phone Beijing about this, they could have a serious problem on their hands in a few years. This fight is a nice 3-in-1 package, a fun boss fight, a fun new ability in the Nightmare Onion, and an ed to apartheid in the lowlands. To earn that though, you've got to blast open the golem with the help of these guys that look like close-ups of bacteria. The golem himself isn't a huge threat on his own, since all he really does is slam when you attack him, which you've seen before with the Brood Smashers, but the bacteria bombs flying around can easily hurt you as much as help if you don't maneuver carefully. The music in this one is definitely one of the highlights of the soundtrack, which makes this intermediate difficulty fight feel a lot more imposing in the moment than it might otherwise be. I have no idea how this guy came about either, but from the way NPCs talk about him, I guess he's just some naturally occurring apex predator type. Not anymore though. Another victim of the exploding bacteria virus is all that remains. There are a lot of mushrooms in this game, both good and bad, but this is the big kahuna. There's this funny little fake out where you hear Dark Sprouts talking about a tough guy who eats them, and when you kill the Brood Smasher, you think that's the whole shebang. Then someone is like, yeah, no, not really, there's a guy about 100 times bigger than that a few doors down though, go knock yourself out. While he might not be terribly difficult, being the first major boss and all, the sense of scale here is one of the biggest in the game. The entire arena is the boss itself essentially, so you're limited to these platforms that he progressively chomps out of play until you nail him enough times. From there, he whips out this suction attack that allows for some interesting movement, which goes on until you take down a progressively increasing amount of weak points while evading helpless, soon-to-be-dead Dark Sprouts. This is just one of those fights where the scenario alone lends itself to a decent oh shit factor that puts it a step above typical smaller-scale bosses. The final obstacle to what you at the time think is the entrance to Paradise Wells is this cracked out defense system, which is in my opinion the most intense fight in the game for the right reasons. It has a multitude of different phases and mechanics present, like Thundermancy and the occasional turret presence, which staves off monotony like apples do doctors, or so I'm told, never really tested that little tidbit of hearsay. Even when you bust it open for some damage, it's got some unique quirks, like that windmilling motion it does to try to draw out your attacks and buy time for its recovery. Or at least I think that's what's going on, since it definitely stressed me out a bit and made me overthink overthink my target choice whenever that part of the fight kicked off. Killing this guy is the first major feeling victory you get against the Dreadlords, and that copium-riddled transmission they send your way afterwards is like giving a shark a taste of blood. Awesome fight. I love me some lasers. Speaking of lasers... The movement and music are my two favorite aspects of this game, so combining a great track with essentially unlimited movement options makes for an incredible boss already, not the least enhanced by the spectacle of it taking place in the void against a laser-shooting alien dragon. This is a great example of playing to the game's strengths, which for the most part I thought were exemplified during the enemy gauntlets they sprung on you throughout the game in pivotal rooms in lieu of a boss fight. While I would say this is overall easier than the Cyber Sentinel, who was a very close second, I think the coolness factor ratchets it up just a hair above to the top spot. DOOMBLADE has an absolutely incredible mid-game with so many of its best bosses coming in such close proximity to one another that it's practically a conga line. I give the Void Dragon the Cytonox seal of approval. Great stuff here. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope you enjoyed. We're probably going to have our video on Final Fantasy XVI out soon, so keep a lookout for that if you're so inclined. As always, make sure to check out our Discord and Patreon, as well as like and subscribe. That's all for now. Deuces.